Hello all, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video I want to talk to you about strategic management and what it's really about, or where I think the field can actually go towards. So if you don't know me, I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I wanted to pay the favor forward and help you out. All right, so we often sort of talk about what strategic management is. So this is the general story behind strategic management, is that there is some sort of agreed upon goal, whatever that particular goal is, and that people allocate resources across many different individuals, many different kinds of technology, many different other organizations to try to accomplish that particular goal. The tricky thing is often we have a lot of mixed goals or conflicting goals. We often have, we don't really have a great idea what resources look like within a company, even though that we might suggest that there are, things like people, technology, routines, all those kind of things. What are routines? Again, these are a repetitive set of interacting actions where people do stuff. And we often think that that kind of solves strategic management. Now I know it's kind of really, or it solves the goal of organizations. Now I know that's kind of a really washy kind of definition of what strategic management is, but the world is really, really complicated. And every time that we sort of try to put on a definition of what strategic management is, it doesn't really fit what it is trying to explain. We're trying to explain this large thing across many different kinds of organizations so that we can actually say that how to actually provide recommendations for managers. That's at the end of the day. I think that's an important thing to think about, is that we want people to think about the world a little bit differently and have some insight into the world and how to actually manage their own particular companies, right? So there's lots of phenomenon that we do look at that is more traditional strategy, or strategy how we might think about it today. We might look at things like mergers and acquisitions, how companies get together, come together and share resources. For example, we might think about diversification, how they might sort of split up different divisions of the company. That's what we call corporate strategy. We might think about alliances, where companies work together with other companies, whether it's, to another company, maybe it could be 50 different companies that they work together. We often also take a deep dive into organizational design. So how do you actually set up the structure within the organization such that you can get an increased performance, maybe in decision making, or coming up with some sort of decision that makes a little bit more sense for everybody that's involved. We also think about things like innovation, for example. How do new ideas get, how do we come up with new ideas to create useful products that can solve some sort of problem that we have both within the organization and the customer's problems that they experience as well. It's a wide-ranging phenomenon. But the more that I have been digging deep into this literature, and the more I've been sort of struggling with it, and I've been going for since about 2003 when I started being really interested in it. So now it's 2020, it's the summer of 2020, so we're looking at like 17 years at this moment. So I am beginning to feel that a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily capture the essence of what we're trying to do. And that's been the long-standing, I think that's one of the biggest sort of themes that we've had ever since we started talking about, organizations and strategic management, which goes back almost 100 years. Actually, it is 100 years. Frederick Taylor was one of them. Bernard was another one. Lots of people that have talked about this for many, many years. And the theme has been always kind of a pushback towards our sort of parent fields of, economics and sociology and psychology and sort of those particular domains. Not so much psychology, but it is kind of evolving in that. But what we're trying to do is actually see how things are actually being done within organizations. We're always sort of pushing back and looking at the reality around us. And I think we're getting more and more sort of realism in trying to explain what's going on. But I think that there's a lot more to go in terms of what we're actually trying to explain and what we're trying to do. So a lot of this might be sort of closer to Mintzberg, for example. Henry Mintzberg might have talked about some of this stuff in terms of what reality is. And I'm a big believer in organizational learning, where you actually look to see how people absorb experiences within an organization, and the organization as a whole executes and learns something, not only executes, but learns something to improve in the future. It might not necessarily improve, but they're trying to improve something in the future and execute so that they actually make decisions faster or better decisions, come up with new novel solutions, all sorts of things like that. And as I've been studying all these particular domains, particularly with the Reciprocity Project, which has really been insightful for me as I've been doing this Reciprocity Project, I'm beginning to realize that this is a little bit mismatched. A lot of the things that we're studying is a little bit mismatched in terms of what we are actually doing in a day-to-day life and what actually happens in a day-to-day life within an organization. And this is somewhat of a call in terms of exploring this a little bit more into different domains and bringing some of these things in. And I realize that there's other fields that sort of study some of these things I'm going to talk about, like family business, for example. There's other areas, in terms of work-life balance that people are they talk about that within organizational behavior. But I think that these are really important concepts that we should be thinking about and bringing in terms of explaining what goes on within the strategy or within the firm as a whole. Because I think that these are vital components, particularly as we move towards these environments where we have, sole entrepreneurs, for example, or freelancers that are participating in the sharing economy. That the more that we're actually working at home, particularly within the coronavirus that hit in the summer or the spring in 2020, we realize that there's a lot more sort of blending that's going on with life around us. So I think there's an important thing that we should be sort of grasping upon. And I think, some of the literature and social movements, they are sort of moving in that direction in terms of thinking about things like legacy and contribution. I think, what's really important here is thinking about how people view the world in terms of executing on their decisions to accomplish the things that they actually want to do and that they actually care about, rather than simply executing on decisions to make more revenue for a firm or to attract more customers, but thinking about how people actually process things such that they are building a community for themselves and that they're building some sort of legacy, and so thinking about their particular contribution for themselves. I myself was really skeptical early on, but as I've sort of built up the Reciprocity Project, the more I realize how important it is to think about these things as we execute on decisions that are really difficult, or do things that are really difficult that take a long time, and that there's huge commitments that you have to do. The more that I realize that this idea is so much more important, the sort of meaningfulness that we have, or thinking about why people actually do the things that they do, even though that there's not a lot of benefit for those particular things. Like, people that are in the ministries, right? Religious ministries, for example, they do all sorts of really wonderful things, even though that they can execute in a different way. They can go in a different industry and actually probably do a little bit better than they currently fare financially. So why are people actually doing those particular things? I think these are interesting questions. The other thing is thinking about, and we still have yet to do this, although, maybe some people are moving towards this in terms of answering some of these things, but getting towards more, softer things like love and bonding, and thinking about how these emotional or affect sort of aspects of our life play in to strategic management. I think it's becoming increasingly more relevant to my own life in terms of processing things and moving forward. But, the tricky thing is, what do these things mean? And that's why I think a lot of us have shied away from it, particularly those of us that have more of an economic sort of processing viewpoint of the world, that we are sort of more economist trained and stuff like that. So I think that those are really, really important concepts in terms of how to actually process and manage the life around us. And I think, so this is the third thing that is really incredibly important in terms of thinking about organizations and what decisions happen, or how decisions actually happen within organizations. But this real flow between family and life, particularly as we move towards more of an atomized, or where we are all operating a little bit more independently than what we were, say, 30, 40 years ago, where we all had to go into work. We all had to, behave in a certain way. But as we become more independent and, technology becomes democratized across individuals, as what happens with technology, internet technology is really driving an important sort of concept, or driving this a lot more. We're going to start seeing a lot more flow between family and life, right? And how people actually use those particular things. So, that there is definitely a lot more fluidity in terms of how we construct reality than what we did even 20 years ago, and what a firm actually looks like, what a company actually looks like. And as we move towards there, it's going to become increasingly more obvious and important that people, have things like daycares, or, then it becomes a norm that people bring their small kids in, for example, into the office. It becomes acceptable to do those things, bring dogs into the office. As we start blending towards all of these aspects in our life. And on that, I think that there is important, ideas that we can sort of explore with mobbing, ideas of mobbing and envy and attacking. We're very human in a lot of things that we do. And I think that we can bring in some more important aspects there, where we sort of envision a world that is less than perfect, that there is a lot of bad things that happen in organizations, that organizations not only commit, but individuals within organizations are able to do, and the sort of emotional aspects of that, and how we actually process these things. Because I think that those are critically important to the performance of the firm and what actually happens. Jackson Nickerson, great strategist, economist kind of person that sort of focuses, on hardcore kind of transaction cost economics kind of research. He actually has a paper on envy in the organization, how organizations actually break apart. And I think that is really important in terms of explaining, what should happen going forward with the world around us, or explaining, aspects of organizations that are becoming a little bit more real and sort of central to what actually happens. I think that there's important aspects that are this is not talked about at all, is looking at the impact of child development and experiences during childhood. I've yet to see anything like that, where people bring in, what happened during childhood? What were the experiences that they had? What is going on with leadership within a company? Why do they behave in certain ways because of these experiences? We know that there is, aspects that are really important to strategic leaders, like narcissism, but that narcissism is not something that just develops today. It's actually stuff that happens from when they were a small child, and how child development actually would imprint and make a difference in what's going on within the organization. And I think the last thing that is critically important in terms of, where strategic management might go, and thinking about different research topics and whatnot, thinking about critical and rare events that happen. So things that change the world around us, and then it no longer becomes the same thing. So when I was during my doctoral program, we had the 2008 financial crisis. That was a really pivotal moment for me. But, there's all sorts of other things. The 2020 coronavirus, nobody's going to imagine the world like the same thing. There was, JFK's assassination. All these sort of moments are critical in terms of how we all view the world and what actually happens with the world around us, and experiences before that are not the same as the experiences that happen after that. And so that has an impact. One would think that it does have an impact on the performance of the firm going forward. So I know that there's lots going on here, but I think that, the world around us in terms of how we imagine strategic management is just beginning. There's so much we can study. If anybody says that strategic management is just about diversification, it's about mergers and acquisitions, it's the very sort of narrow views of what strategic management looks like, those are really important. However, in the grand scheme of things, what I'm trying to get you to think about is how can we move what we understand organizations doing towards more of a reality of what we're seeing today around us and what we are actually doing as human beings in terms of what is going on around us. Things like, so for example, YouTube, what does that all mean? Right? How do we sort of shape that as an organization in terms of people contributing and shaping what is going on there? Why are we sort of emotionally attached to that? I think it's, this sort of aspects of, technology plays a really important role to YouTube and the organization as well, but there's so much more that's going on behind the scenes in terms of me bonding with you right now that is very, very important in terms of how we understand what strategic managers actually do and what the world around us is actually looking like and where it's going. So my point is, if you're going and doing any sort of research on organizations, on the world around us, it is amazing what we can study. And I think we can open up the domain even more. There's so much more we can go towards to explain. The world is not just about Coke and Pepsi. The world is not about the IBMs. There's so much more that we can explain. I would love somebody, and I've said this for years, I would love somebody to go and study hot dog vendors and actually go and have a conversation with hot dog vendors and see how they're managing their venture, their organization. What is going on there? Why can't we explore these particular things? Go into those domains, look at the world around us, look at the real world around us, and then you're going to get a lot of insight. So for those of you who are going and doing a PhD in the social sciences, go and actually just be a real person and see what real things are happening, and you're going to quickly realize that, man, we don't explain a lot. There's so much more we can do. So with that, give me a thumbs up if you like this video, if you appreciate it, and share the word and get out there and do some really interesting things and study interesting things. So take care and have a wonderful day.